These running backs are in trouble heading into week 4 fantasy football. Starting it off with player number 1, it's going to be DeAndre Swift for the Chicago Bears. And DeAndre Swift, 5 fantasy points, 8 fantasy points, and 6 fantasy points over the last 3 weeks, and it wasn't good. 13 attempts, 20 yards, did have 4 targets for 2 receptions. But the part for me with DeAndre Swift that has me so concerned going forward is the overall snap counts. We had DeAndre Swift got 48 snaps, got 13 total carries and 3 targets. We got Roschon Johnson, who had 33 snaps, had 5 targets, and had 8 carries. And then we had Khalil Herbert that had 9 snaps and had 4 carries in those 9 snaps and had 2 routes run. Now, DeAndre Swift is still getting the majority of the work. He did get that huge contract from the Chicago Bears, but you guys need to be considering and panicking on DeAndre Swift because you were drafting him. He was a dead zone running back, but last year when he kind of broke out of the dead zone, he has not been able to break out of the dead zone so far. So I'm definitely panicking. I'm definitely a little bit worried of DeAndre Swift going into the rest of the season. You definitely can't feel really comfortable starting him. DeAndre Swift, we got to just kind of have an open mind going forward. Next guy is going to be Zamir White. And I was an absolute idiot and I apologize. I thought this matchup versus the Carolina Panthers, I said, hey, this is make or break time for Zamir White going up against the Carolina Panthers defense. Now we saw the Carolina Panthers offense absolutely emerge, but Zamir White only had 3.4 fantasy points in full PPR in week 3, had 10 attempts for 34 yards, 3.4 yards per carry. And I'm just going to say this about Zamir White, cut him. That's all I have to say. Cut Zamir White. I mean, when we're looking at the overall usage here for all plays, Alexander Mattison is actually out-snapping Zamir White at this point in the season. And I know early down work, Alexander Madison's starting to get more of the early down work. I mean, if we look at this usage, it's just not looking good for Zamir White. And so if I have Zamir White, I mean, could you trade him low? I don't know. I don't think you're going to be able to trade him. I think he's probably going to be cut bait. So you're going to just have to cut Zamir White. See ya, sayonara. This has been a good run. I can't believe you hoodwinked us. I mean, he was being drafted as RB23 heading into the season, and it's just been absolutely terrible. The next running back that you need to be panicking on for fantasy football purposes is going to be Javonte Williams for the Denver Broncos. And you know what? The Denver Broncos had quite the win over the Tampa Bay Bucks. You know, Bo Nix looked good. This whole offense really looked good, but Javonte Williams, only 6 fantasy points, 6.1 fantasy points, 5 attempts for 12 yards, 2.4 yards per carry, had 4 targets, 4 receptions, 29 yards, but he did lose a fumble, so only had 6 fantasy points. In week 2, had 11.5 fantasy points and had 3 fantasy points in week 1. So overall, he's the 37th running back on the board. But when we start to take a look at these overall snap shares, I mean, we got Javonte Williams in here, we got Jaleel McLaughlin, and we got Tyler Batty. Tyler Batty, honestly, had 9 carries to Javonte Williams' 5. Now, I know it was more of a blowout. I understand. The game script was probably to pull out your starters. But Tyler Batty, who was an undrafted free agent, looked more explosive in this week 3 game than Javonte Williams. The same thing that I'm panicking on with Zamir White and potentially debating dropping, I'm debating the same exact thing here with Javonte Williams. I don't think there is necessarily going to be a super solid fantasy football option in this offense besides Bo Nix and Courtland Sutton that you can kind of rely on weekly. And so Javonte Williams, like I said, I know it's desperate out there. I know the waiver wire can be super depleted with running back depth because everyone wants the running backs. But goodness gracious, I think Javonte, you got to figure like, how am I going to get out? Because this is absolutely atrocious. Javonte Williams has absolutely sucked. My next guy that we are panicking on heading into week 4 fantasy football is going to be Jaylen Warren for the Steelers. And going into the season, there was a part of me that felt like the Najee Harris hype was just getting a little out of control and that Jaylen Warren was actually going to be the lightning. He was going to be the Cordell Patterson of this offense. Well, what ends up happening is instead of Jaylen Warren becoming the Cordell Patterson, they just signed Cordell Patterson. And Jaylen Warren, of course, started the season off a little bit banged up. 4 fantasy points in week 1, 8 fantasy points in week 2, and then only 1.1 fantasy point in week 3. Only had 3 attempts for 5 yards, 1 target for 1 reception, which was a loss of 4 yards. But when we really start to take a look at this overall snap share, Najee Harris had 40 snaps, Cordell Patterson had 23, and then Jaylen Warren had 23. The difference between the 23 for Cordell Patterson is he actually got 4 carries and he got 5 targets compared to 3 carries and only 1 target for Jaylen Warren. So Cordell Patterson has definitely eclipsed Jaylen Warren, just we can say it, as the RB2. We should have seen it coming. Cordell Patterson is Arthur Smith's son. I don't know what else to say. I just have to say Jaylen Warren, definitely another player that's potentially heading to the waiver wire with you. Like I said, when these guys are not performing, we're 3 weeks in and these running backs are struggling to get onto the field. It's almost impossible for me to tell tell you with a straight face, yeah, we're just going to keep him. We're going to roll him back out for another week. Like, we can't do that. We 100% need to be looking at other options. My next player that we're going to be talking about that I'm absolutely panicking on is going to be Gus Edwards. And I understand Gus Edwards went up against the Steelers. It was a rough matchup, but the thing that we do need to understand with Gus Edwards was you were drafting him ahead of J.K. Dobbins. And I guess if we would have known J.K. Dobbins would have looked like prime J.K. Dobbins, we probably wouldn't be in this current circumstance. 3 fantasy points in week 1. In week 2, only had 5 fantasy points, and then didn't even get a full fantasy point in full PPR in week 3. Had 3 attempts for 9 yards and 3 yards per carry. And J.K. Dobbins, if we're looking at this overall running back usage chart right here, what you're going to see is that Gus Edwards is getting on the field a decent amount, but J.K. Dobbins has just continued to take more of the all plays, the early down plays. The third downs are almost all entirely J.K. Dobbins. And so J.K. Dobbins is the clear one. We've known that for a while, but if you have Gus Edwards, like, can we pivot to another option? Because it's not looking good for Gus Edwards at all. Like, at all. Gus Edwards is hopefully going to be like a glorified handcuff rest of the season, but you were drafting him to be the starter. We thought with this Greg Roman-led scheme that he's had success in the past, but J.K. Dobbins clearly, like, retaking the Baltimore Ravens throne is what J.K. Dobbins has done, overtaking Gus Edwards. So we should have probably seen that coming, but I am a little bit worried about Gus Edwards going into the season. And my last guy, running back, that I'm a little bit worried on is, of course, Rhamondre Stevenson, and only 0.3 fantasy points in week 3 versus Jets, had a 46% snap share, 6 attempts for 23 yards, and 3.83 yards per carry. And I do want to say this, Rhamondre Stevenson, he just had a terrible night. This is his worst fantasy football showing by far in either of his last 2 seasons. Like, last 2 seasons, this was the worst showing. So if you probably started Rhamondre Stevenson, you probably lost your week. And so you're going to say to me, Caleb, well, what am I doing? I'm at this point telling you not to drop Rhamondre Stevenson. I think that's crazy. I do think it's crazy. What I will say about this matchup for the Patriots, when we look at overall running backs, 24 snaps for Rhamondre, 19 snaps for Antonio Gibson. But when we look at actual routes run, Rhamondre Stevenson ran more routes. He also had more carries. So this was just a terrible day for the Patriots. They got down early and then they had to resort to the pass. So I actually do think this is like a decent buy low opportunity to get like Rhamondre Stevenson. No, Rhamondre Stevenson is not going to be the high end RB1 that some people thought he was going to be after 21 and 17 fantasy points. So I think we have to lower back down expectations. But if you have a panicky fantasy football manager of Rhamondre Stevenson in your league, I definitely think that would be an opportunity to go get a buy, because like I said, he is still a top 20 running back even after this really abysmal performance. We've seen like guys like Javonte Williams, Jaylen Warren, they're not performing. Rhamondre Stevenson has 1 down week. Let's re-roll in the next few weeks to kind of go out and try to see if Rhamondre Stevenson can be anything for our fantasy football team. But these are some guys that I'm panicking on. I definitely think we're starting to get to the point with a lot of these guys, like the Javontes, like the Warrens, like the Zamir Whites, that we do need to definitely debate cutting ship and looking for replacements on the waiver wire. If you like fantasy football, hit that like and subscribe button on the way to 3,000 subscribers. Appreciate you guys for tuning in, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.